Page 360. What a fellowship, what a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arms. What a blessedness, what a peace is mine, leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning on the everlasting arms. Oh, how sweet to walk in this pilgrim way, leaning on the everlasting arms. Oh, how bright the path grows from day to day, leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning on the everlasting arms. What have I to dread? What have I to fear? Leaning on the everlasting arms. I have blessed peace with my Lord so near, leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning on the everlasting arms.
Thankful for the song of leaning on his everlasting arms. And there's been plenty of times that a lot of times we don't like to say it, but that I have failed him. But he has never failed me, and he has always been faithful, and I am thankful for that. Some odd reason, the Lord is sending me to Old Testament. If you don't like the Old Testament, I'm sorry. But I really do like the Old Testament, because without the Old, we'd never have the New. So I'm going to be out of the book of Numbers for our scriptural text this evening. So I'll allow you a little bit of time to find it. Numbers in the 14th chapter. And I'm going to go at verse 22. Wait. So I'm going to be out of Numbers in the 14th chapter, and I'm going to read verses, or Braden's going to read, verses 22 through 24.
Because all those men which I have seen my glory and my miracles, which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and tempted me now these 10 times, and have not hearkened to my voice, surely they shall not see the land which I swear unto the fathers, neither shall any of them be provoked me see it. But my servant Caleb, because he had other spirit with him, and hath followed me fully, him will I bring into the land where into he went, and his seed shall possess him.
Possess it.
Possess it.
All right. All right. We're going to stop there for now. I'll let you guys be seated. Here you are, sir. I'll use you here and again in a little bit. So in Numbers 12, I was thinking along the lines whenever Pastor Dean had asked me to speak. And I always go to the Lord in prayer about anything that the Lord has me to do. And I was thinking about, I just kept thinking about the rock, and Jesus being the rock of our salvation. And I think about a rock and, about how Jesus is referenced many times in the New Testament as about being this rock and what the rock really stands for. And as I was thinking about, Jesus being the rock in the New Testament, he was also the rock in the Old Testament. We have this mindset a lot of times that Jesus just came forth in the New Testament out of nowhere. and he was never anywhere to be found in the Old Testament. So I think about how when you go back to the Old Testament, and starting in Numbers 14 and 22, he's talking here about how he says, because all those men which have seen my glory and my miracles, which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, have tempted me now these 10 times and have not hearkened to my voice. So we know the story about the Israelites. And Israel was in Egyptian bondage for about 430 years. And as they are in bondage, they are waiting. And they are just waiting after all this hard labor and hard work and strife and all these things that are going on because they're in slavery, that they are waiting for God to give them that promise that they will be delivered and that they'll be able to be the people that God always said that they were going to be. And as they are in Egyptian bondage, they are begging to get out. And because they're looking at the oppression, they're looking at what's going on in their lives, and they know that inside of them, Egypt is home, but it's not really home. And I think about how as us as Christians today, we should feel like, yes, we're present in earth. Like, yes, Point Pleasant, West Virginia is home. That is my address. But there is a part of me on the inside that knows that I do not belong here, that this is not really home, that there is something else that I am longing for and something else that I am yearning for that I know is where I truly belong. And this is just a temporary time until that time actually comes. And as Egypt is actually ruling over Israel, and you say, well, why were they ruling over Israel? Because God allowed it to happen. But if they were so disobedient and turned their back against God and allowed all those things to actually take place, they would have never went into Egyptian bondage. But God never forgot them. And along the way, as they were going through this wilderness of sin, up to 10 times, and there's a lot of times where we say, well, maybe it wasn't 10 times, but it says here in Numbers, it says there were 10 times when the Israelites provoked God to anger. That there were 10 times along this journey that they had something to complain about. That God had delivered them out of Egyptian bondage, just like he said he was going to, had used Moses as Aaron as the mouthpiece, Moses as the leader, to do all these miracles and everything before Israel, and no matter how far it seemed like they would go, they would take steps back because they were never satisfied. And it seems like in those 10 times, the Lord finally came to a point to where he got fed up and angry because they would not listen and hearken to what he was trying to do for them in their lives. And I honestly think that things have not really changed that much from since then to the way that we actually accept God today. That God continues to provide for us every day. Looking around, I believe we all had food to eat today. We all had water to drink. We all have clothes on. We all probably have a bed to go home to tonight. We probably have heat and air. We have all those things. But still, we continue to complain. Now, oftentimes I ask somebody, how are they doing? And a lot of times I get this response. Well, I don't have much to complain about. But as you start to talk, you say, yeah, I can say the same thing, but I find myself complaining anyway. We don't have much to complain about, but we still find ourselves complaining whenever we should be satisfied with what God has given us. And so he says in these 10 times into 23, he says, surely they shall not see the land which I swear unto their fathers, neither shall any of them that provoked me see it. So their goal was the promised land. That is where their vision and their mindset should have been. That was home. That was a place that God said, this is a place I've prepared for you, and that's where I'm taking you. But they got so blinded by the physical body, because this physical body gets in the way of the spiritual body many times. And whether it was food that they complained about whenever God had to provide manna and quail, whether it was water, which the Lord had to provide, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, not just once, but twice. No matter what was going on, every time opposition came around, where did they want to go back to? Egypt. They didn't want to sit there and just push through and trust in God and his mercy. They wanted to go back to Egypt because they would rather be back in where they knew that they had food and they were taken care of. Even though it was slavery, they were willing to accept Egypt as home because they at least knew that it was proven to them. But see, the thing was God and Jesus was proving himself to them every single day. And they just failed to realize it. So he says here, because of this anger, because of what's going on, they're never going to inherit the promised land. They're never going to step foot there. Not only that, but they're never even going to see it. Because of them continuously provoking God to anger. Now think about Moses. Now we know that Moses, because of his disobedience to God, also did not get to enter into the promised land. But God in his mercy at least allowed Moses to go up on Mount Nebo and actually look over and see it. And he saw it, and he found that goodness to where after Moses saw it, he was actually willing to accept death. Because at least he knew he wasn't going to inherit it, but at least he knew that it was real. I think about how there are a lot of people, as we took prayer requests, about how there are many that we've talked about that's already passed. And families that are left with the burden of being able to live on while others are no longer here. No matter how old we get, no matter how used to death we get, it still hurts. And it still leaves an empty void somewhere, someplace. But I think about how whenever Moses got this confirmation that it was there, as he had already prepared Joshua, because he knew he wasn't allowed to enter there, God had already told him. And he prepared Joshua to take his place. Just seeing it gave Moses confirmation of knowing, I've done my part. And in 24 he says, but my servant Caleb, because he had another spirit with him, have followed me fully. Him will I bring into the land whereunto he went, and his seed shall possess it. I'm going to go back a little bit. I need my helper. Is this how you act in school? You make straight A's. You got it? All right, Braden's going to read out of Exodus 17th chapter, verses 1 through 7.
And all the congregation of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of Sin, and their journeys according to the commandment of the Lord, and pitched in.
Just guess, they won't know either.
Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. Wherefore the people do chide with Moses, and God said, give us water that we may drink. And Moses said unto them, why you chide ye with me? Wherefore do you tempt the Lord? And the people thirsted, and thirsted therefore water. And the people was murmured against Moses, and said, wherefore is that thou hast brought out of Egypt to kill us and our children and cattle with thirst? And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, what shall I do unto this people? They be almost ready to stone me. And the Lord said unto Moses, go on before the people, and take with thee of the elders of Israel, and their rod wherewith thou smotest the river, take in thine hand, and go. Behold, I stand before thee there upon the rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the chiding of the people of the children of Israel, and because they tempted the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not?
Good job. So I think about, as we looked in Exodus there, they come to a place to where they are complaining that they have no water. And as they are complaining about the lack of water, they get angry with Moses. And they start to chide, and I guess a proper word will be quarreling. If you look at Meribah, it means to quarrel. And they're having this dispute and this bickering back and forth with Moses of, if we don't have any water, and you knew we were going to come out here into this wilderness, there'd be no water, and you knew that things were going to happen, then you pretty much just brought us out here to die. And they started to think about, well, where did we have water? Now, in Egypt, we might have had slavery. In Egypt, we might have been in bondage. In Egypt, it might have been hard, but at least we had water. And they started to look at Moses, and they started to complain because Moses wasn't providing for them. And isn't this, Moses did the only thing, and this is what Moses did quite often. He didn't curl back and forth with the people. He went to God. And he was that intercessor and went to God, and he got down on his face many times, and Aaron did as well, to where he pleaded to God of, what am I supposed to do? The people have turned their back on not just me, but you. They are complaining that we've made it this far, but now there is no water, and I have no water to give them. They're ready to go to Egypt, and not only are they ready to go back to Egypt, but they're willing to kill me. And they'll kill me and set up a new leader, and they'll do what they want to do because that's where their hearts are. But yet, whenever he went and he petitioned to God of what should I do, God, like he always does, whenever you ask for wisdom, God gave him an answer. And I think about many times, people would act out of pure emotion in that instance instead of actually going to God first. If Moses would have did what he wanted to do and what was going on inside of him without going to God, this would have been completely different. But instead, he sought after God first because he knew that God was one who was going to give him the answer that he needed in order to provide in this situation. So it says in verse 4, he says, Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, what shall I do unto this people? They be almost ready to stone me. And the Lord said unto Moses, go on before the people, and take with thee of the elders of Israel, and thy rod wherewith thou hast smotest the river, take in thine hand and go. Notice the rod. The rod has importance, because it was that same rod that he took whenever he was right there in Israel or in Egypt, and he went to the Red Sea and he departed it with God's help. And they knew that whenever they saw this rod and they remembered the 10 plagues and all that was going on, that rod had significant meaning because it was that presence of God was helping to deliver them through Egypt. So that rod had that significance. He said, so take that rod, which you smote the river, take it in thy hand and go. Behold, I will stand before thee. Look what he says, I will stand before thee. This is God talking. I will stand before thee, and there upon the rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come out water out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. So Moses goes to this rock in Horeb, under the commandment of God, takes the rod, as the Lord is present right there, smotes the rock, and out of this rock, now I like how a lot of translations will look at it and say, it's not just some rock that we typically look at. This was more likely a cliff face. That whenever he took this rod and he smote this side of a cliff, that whenever he hit it, out came water. And it wasn't just a trickle of water, but I believe the water poured out to where it was more than enough. And as it came out, it was more than enough. God supplied their need. And in it, I think about how in that time of desperation, because they were desperate, many of them thought death was coming. And he looked at it and God said, you want water? I'll give you water. If that's what it's going to take for you to stop arguing, if that's what it's going to take for you to trust in me, if that's what it's going to take for you to believe in me, I'll provide water. And he gave them water. And many people will say that should have been a miracle in itself to where they didn't need anything else. But it wasn't. And I think about today, I hear people say so often, well, I'll serve God, but he's got to give me a sign first. I've heard all kinds of, I don't like the word, but we used to call them deathbed confessions. People would sit there and they'd be really sick or get a bad report, and they would sit there and they would try to bargain with God and sit there and say that if God does this for me, then I'll do this for him. God's already done enough. Now, it might not look at it now. You might look at bank accounts and the size of homes and vehicles and everything else, and it might not be extravagant according to the things of the world. But God is still God. And as long as you have him on your side, he is enough. To them, the body needed water. And they knew that without water, they would not survive. But they had the living water with them the whole time. God did not leave them. God did not forsake them. He was right there with them every single step of the way. But they allowed the physical needs to overtake in that moment the spiritual needs. And I think about how because of idol worship and other things along the way, they allowed the physical man to get inside of the spiritual man many times. To where this yearning that was going on inside of them of the physical lust and desires allowed them to take a hold of what God was trying to do in their lives. So as the Lord stood there at the rock and he smote it, out came water. And he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah because of the chiding of the children of Israel. And because they tempted the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? What a question. I thought about that question the last couple of days. The reason it was called what it was called was because they actually questioned inside of themselves, pretty much, where's God? Is he on our side? Is he not on our side? Is he with us? Or is he for us? Or is he against us? And they started looking at themselves, is the Lord among us? And how quickly they forgot about all that God had done up to that point. Why? Because in that moment, all they could see was what was in front of them, and they forgot what was already behind them. And this was the first time that Moses had an experience with a rock and water. And you look at it and say, well, why would it take another experience? Well, see, this was a testing not of Moses, This was the testing of the people. The next time whenever Moses has an interaction with a rock, it wasn't the testing of the people, but it was a test for Moses. See, there's tests that come along our way that you don't know whether they're for you or they're for somebody else. That you might go through something to say, I don't know why I even heard that. It doesn't apply to me whatsoever. Only for 3 or 4 days to go by, and then you start looking at it and you're like, oh, that did apply to me. Or God knew exactly what I needed to hear in that moment. It might not have happened then, but now that it's happened, I understand it a little bit more. So I think about how many times we kind of discredit or throw things off to the side whenever they don't seem like they apply to us. But I believe everything in the Word of God applies to us. It just happens at different times. When we talk about mature Christians, I wish I could consider myself a mature Christian. I'm getting there. I still find myself relatively young in my Christian walk with God. But I'm telling you, I'm thankful that I have people in my life that whenever I do have trouble, when I do have trials, that I have people I can talk to. There's no greater comfort that you have in a Christian than be able to call up a brother or sister or visit a brother and sister whenever you're going through something and say, hey, can we talk? I tell you, I love whenever I'm able to, if I'm experiencing something I've never experienced, I'm thankful that I can call someone that has experienced it and they know how I feel. If I'm feeling a certain way or if I'm going through a certain thing, I'm not going to call somebody up that's never been through it because they don't know that pain. They don't know that sorrow. They don't know how that heartache. God does. Think about Jesus whenever we talk about death. You can use those 2 words, Jesus wept, all you want to. But the emotion that he had, look, he knew Lazarus was going to die. He knew what was going to happen. But still, whenever he came in the presence of the people, he wept. And they looked and said, oh, how he loved them. But he wept because in that fleshly body, he felt what we felt. I've heard people say that whenever Jesus went to the cross, he didn't feel any of it. You're kidding yourself. He felt it all. The plucking of his beard, whenever the thorns went down onto his head, whenever he was slapped in the face, when he was spit on, whenever the nails went into his hands and into his feet, he felt all of those things. But he did them not for himself, but he did them for us. So whenever we look at it, we say, well, he took our place. He genuinely took our place because he knew he wasn't going to be able to do it for ourselves. And he went the whole way. I'm going to look at, thank you. Exodus 13, 21 and 22. Go back just a couple chapters. And it's, oh, you want to read? Come on. You got it.
And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground, and the waters were were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left.
All right, good job. Good job. So they asked the question, is the Lord among us or not? How quickly they forgot what happened just a couple chapters before. Remember how the Lord led them. If you remember, as they were going through the wilderness, they weren't alone. They were led by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And as you go into the New Testament, it says that that pillar of cloud and pillar of fire is the Lord. He was leading them. He wasn't just something that just came up out of nowhere. He led them through the wilderness to where whenever I think about the tabernacle, whenever the tabernacle was built and the cloud stopped, the people didn't move. They didn't move whenever they just wanted to get up and go. They moved as the cloud moved because that showed the presence of God with them. So whenever they got there, and this was the time to whenever they come to the Red Sea, remember the story. Here's Israel. They're leaving Egyptian bondage. Pharaoh had already told them to go. Now God has hardened Pharaoh's heart again. They're up. Here's the Red Sea. Here's Israel. The Egyptians are chasing on the chariots behind them. They don't know what they're going to do. He takes the rod, stretches it forth. The sea parts, and the cloud does something. The cloud no longer is before them, but it goes in between them in Egypt. This is that time where the Lord all that time was leading them along the way. But now for a brief moment of time, God has decided that I'm no longer going to be in front of you, but I'm going to be in between you because I know that your enemy is coming and I am going to protect you every single step of the way. So as they were going through this Red Sea, it was a light. Get this, that pillar of cloud was a light to the Israelites. so that they could see, they could have direction, they could have protection, they were guided, but it was darkness to the Egyptians. Now, a lot of people say, well, how does that work? How can it be a light to somebody and darkness to other? Because God can do whatever he wants to do. And if he decides and says that one of it's going to be a light to somebody and darkness to somebody else, he's going to allow it to be light to somebody and darkness to somebody else. But the thing was Israel should have been walking in the light of God. Egypt was not. And as that separation was there, it was a form of protection to them of knowing that as you continue to move forward, I've got your back. That you don't have to turn around and look behind you anymore about how close is the enemy or are we close to death. Just know that I am there. And as long as I am there, everything is going to be just fine. And I think about how that means so much to me in my life. Because there are times whenever I know that God is out front of me working. And then there's times whenever God's told me to stand still, and I've had to stand still. And as much as I've wanted to move, he said, don't move. Tell you what, right now, standing still sometimes is hard to do. The retired community, if this is you, I'm sorry. But if I'm inaccurate, please tell me. I hear people all the time talk about how they couldn't wait to retire. Because whenever they retired, they were going to slow down. And then I talk to them, and I'm like, how's retirement going? I'm doing more now that I'm retired than what I was doing when I was actually working. I'm never home. Whenever God tells us to stand still and see his salvation and see what he's trying to do in our lives, many times that's hard for us to do because we want to be the ones in control. We want to be the ones that say, look what I can do. God, it's okay. I know that you're in control, but watch what I can do with this one. Let me take this one by myself and let me show you what I can do. If you're like me, every time you've tried to do it your way, you found yourself going right back to God saying, yeah, you're right, I was wrong. I can't do anything without you. And then sometimes I think God has a sense of humor. And he just laughs. And like probably what my mom would have probably done several times. But you know what? He loves us as we are his children. And sometimes he allows us to do what we need to do in order for us to realize that we do fail. And then we come back to him. So as they look and they forgot, so when he said, ask the question, is the Lord with us or not? Or is the Lord among us or not? How quickly they forget that that pillar of cloud and that pillar of fire was still there. God had not left them. They just were too blinded in the moment to realize that he was still there. There are many people today that feel like that they need to give up on God. Why? Because they feel like that God has given up on them. Now, have there been times in my life, and I'll just get real honest with you, have there been times in my life to where I felt like that God wasn't present with me in that moment? Yes. Have there been hardships came along the way and I'm like, Lord, where are you now whenever I need you the most? And it seems like he's not there, where I don't feel him as strong as what I used to, or it didn't feel like I felt that big hug or whatever, however you want to describe it. In due time, it came. Not whenever I really wanted it, but when I needed it. And that's the difference. It's not about our wants. It's about our needs with God. And he does supply our needs. And there's many times where he gives you your wants, even though they might not be what's best for you in that moment. But he knows exactly what he's doing when he's doing it. I'm going to speed up just a little bit. I told Julie today I'd be done. I lied. Sorry, Julie. I said 7 o'clock tops. 7:10. Dean will never ask me again. Oh, well. If we can we go to Numbers 20, 1 and 2. And I want to read this real quick. I got it. I got this one. Don't be so sad. So Numbers 21 and 2 says, Then came the children of Israel, even the whole congregation, into the land, into the desert of Zin in the first month, and the people abode in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. So remember, Miriam is Aaron and Moses' sister. And there was no water in the congregation, and they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. Second time, no water. You thought they would have learned the first time. What do? They start complaining to Moses and Aaron. And it said, and the people chode with Moses and spake, saying, would God that we had died when our brethren died before the Lord. And why have ye brought up the congregation of the Lord into this wilderness, that we and our cattle should die there? Same story. And wherefore have ye made us to come up out of Egypt to bring us into this evil place? It is no place of seed, or of figs, or of vines, or of pomegranates. Neither is there any water to drink. And Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and they fell upon their faces. And the glory of the Lord appeared unto them. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, take thy rod, and gather the assembly together, thou and Aaron thy brother, and speak ye unto the rock before their eyes, and it shall give forth his water. And thou shalt bring forth to them water out of the rock. So thou shalt give the congregation and their beasts drink. So think about this. The same story as the first time. He said, take that same rod. Here's Moses and Aaron pleading for God's help and wisdom. He says, take that rod, the same thing you did the first time, but there's one little difference this time. You're not going to go and hit the rock. You're going to go and speak to the rock. And whenever you speak to the rock, water's going to come out. So as after the instructions of Moses, it says, Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock. And he said unto them, hear now, ye rebels, must we, key word, fetch you water out of this rock. Look where Moses' heart is right now. Look, you think about 10 times total or around that time that they've already been in complaints and already tested God through the wilderness. Moses' sister had just died and been buried. There was a lot probably stirring inside of Moses. And they're sitting there saying, why don't you sit there and provide us water again? Because they remembered what happened before. When we complained the first time, all we did was complain, and the more we complained, you provided. And whenever you smote the rock, water came out, and it satisfied us. So let's do it again. But the Lord said, but Moses, this time I want it to be different. I want you to go to that rock, and I want you to speak to it. And as you speak to it, I'm going to allow water to come out. But Moses looks at the people, and this indignation that stirs inside of him, he brings this out about how he says, we. He's saying, we, how are we going to provide you with water? Moses at that time wasn't giving God credit for anything. His focus was on what is he going to do for the people. He said, can we provide you water? Are we going to do this for you? Are we going to do that for you? And as he goes to the rock, it says, Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he commanded, and Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation therefore together before the rock. And he said unto them, hear now, ye rebels, must we fetch you water out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand, and with the rod he smote the rock twice. And the water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their beasts also. That's not what God commanded Moses to do. The reason that he said speak to the rock was because the first time whenever the rock was smote is a foretelling of what Christ came to do for all of mankind. About how whenever Christ came, he was smote. Christ did die for us one time. He was smote and he took our transgressions one time. He is that spiritual rock. So whenever he was smote, he wasn't ever going to be smote again. We can't expect for Christ to ever go to the cross again on our behalf because he's never going to do it. He was that high priest, perfect high priest, holy, blameless, spotless, all of those things, to where whenever he died, he was a perfect sacrifice once and for all. That is a guarantee. Christ did what he said he was going to do, and the blood that he shed then is still as good today as what it was 2,000 years ago. So he said that he wasn't going to be smote again. We're not expecting Christ every time that somebody sins or every time that something goes wrong that we can say, go back to the cross and crucify yourself so that we can have life. He's not going to do it. He's already given his life for us. See, the old law required sin sacrifices every year because it was just temporary. And the people knew it was temporary. But not only did the people offer up a sacrifice for their sin, but the high priest did as well, because they were human. So before they could offer up a sin sacrifice for you, they had to offer up a sin sacrifice for themselves. So I think about how Christ never had to offer up a sin sacrifice. He was the sacrifice. He was our sacrifice for all people. So whenever he said, do not smite the rock, he was saying that I am not going to be smitten again. I'm not going to be smote upon to where you're going to expect me to do this every single time for the healings of your transgressions. But I want you to speak to it. And Moses took that rod, and he not only hit it once, but he hit it twice. and water came out of it abundantly. I believe there was more water came out of it the second time than there was the first. That word abundantly means something. And in it, the people looked at it, and they didn't give glory to God. I believe a lot of them probably even gave a little bit of glory to Moses. God in that was wanting to be sanctified to where God could be the one to receive the glory. Imagine the miracle. Moses with this rod standing before a whole congregation. All he does is speak to a rock, and water just starts pouring out of it. Nobody can explain that. Nobody can discredit God and what God was able to do. If someone speaks to a rock and water comes out of it, we should all be amazed. But if somebody hits a rock and water comes out of it, we're like, oh, okay, that's pretty neat. All right, maybe I can hit it and something else can come out of it. But speaking to it means something, because in that moment it's showing that God is there and he is present. But Moses, in his anger, allowed anger to take over for just a brief moment. And he smote the rock twice. Water comes out. The people are watered. The cattle was watered. And Moses is disciplined. Moses does not inherit the promised land as far as walking into the promised land because of this moment right here. All that Moses had done, the delivering of the Red Sea, the 10 plagues, not what Moses had done, but what God had used Moses for. All those things that Moses had went through, the miracles and the calling and the thing about the burning bush and all those things, it was all gone just like that. Because in that moment, God was going to use him for something great. But Moses took it upon himself to glorify himself. So because Moses actually gets the word that Moses, because of what you have done, you're not going to enter into the promised land. Imagine what Moses must have felt when he heard that news. I believe Moses was thinking about all the good things that he had done. But I had done this, I had done that. But then I believe that Moses understood. And even as he got in his older years, he was still in pretty good shape. Eyes weren't dim. Countenance was still pretty good. And he goes up onto that mountain, he looks over, and he sees everything that God had ever talked about. And he saw it, and he was at peace because he knew God was in control. I tell you, I think the reason that God brought me to the story was for the fact of this. He is the rock in our life, to where he is steadfast and he is unshakable. About how our faith sometimes might feel shaken, but as long as we're on that solid foundation, we'll be able to prevail. And there's nothing that can come our way that will be able to defeat us. As long as the Lord is on our side, it should not matter who's against us. This world is against us. I had a speaker today in school, and we were talking a little bit. And I actually found out that she actually attended a Christian school. And we're considering going that route with Braden and Briar. And I said, can you tell me what in your experience is the plus and minuses of going to a Christian school? And she said, people always talk about how you were sheltered in a Christian school, about how you were kind of away from a lot of the things that's in the real world, about how you're sheltered and you're kind of secluded from a lot of things that are out there. She said, somewhat that's true. But she said, I'm also thankful for a lot of the things that I was secluded from, that I wasn't introduced to. She said, because in those moments I felt God's protection over me. And I knew that in that moment I might have complained to my dad about it, but he was trying to do what was best for me. And as we were talking about it, she was like, I think a lot of times the world can't accept change because we're afraid of it. We're afraid of change because we like things like, look, if you've been in the same house for 30 years and God says, I want to relocate you to another city, into another house, many of you are going to put your foot down and say, I ain't going because this is home. Because it's proven over and over again. Why do we not have that same mindset with God? Why do we not have that same mindset that God is proven? And he has proved himself to us over and over and over again. And he said he would be faithful, and he's been faithful. He said he would be there, he's there. He said he would never leave, he's never left. Have maybe there been a time where you went the other direction? Probably. But he is there. And he's not forgot about you, and he even cares enough to know your name, cares enough to know about the hairs on your head. It cares enough to know where I look at it and I say, I think it's unique that we can all have different sets of fingerprints because God has made us all different. And none of us are the same because God cares about us all. And we're special to him. But has that spiritual rock provided water? Because he is that water. He has given us living water that we can drink freely, that will never run dry. And whenever we need it and we need to call upon him, he is always there. And that is a comfort that all of us should have, is that comfort of knowing, God, when I need you, when I call upon your name, even whenever you can't call. I've said this so many times. I'm going to close with this. You probably get sick of me hearing this, but this is kind of my testimony in a lot of ways. The amount of times in my life that I have been wanting to go to the Lord in prayer, but not ever able to say a single word. Anybody ever been there? Where you've tried to pray, but nothing ever came out? And sometimes it's just tears that's flowing down your cheeks. I am thankful in that moment that the Holy Spirit makes intercession for me to where it'll speak for me, even though I don't know the words to say or even know what to do, that it'll speak for me and go directly to the Father to where he knows exactly what I'm feeling, what I'm going through, what I need to say. And in those tears, there are prayers that are being sent out that I don't even know what's going on or whatever's being said, but God knows all about it. And you say, well, why is that a testimony? Because it's not about me. It's about God. Our testimony is our witness. Is our witness of what has God done in our lives. And I remember services when I was growing up in little old country churches because I was raised in one and I loved them. We would have church services every once in a while where they would call them praise services. Almost like popcorn services, I believe was what my grandma would used to call it. And it would start off by someone would sing a song, and then somebody would get up and give a testimony. And then somebody else would sing a song, and there'd be another testimony, and another testimony. And by the time you realize it was 40 minutes into the service and the preacher hasn't said anything, whoever was scheduled to sing hasn't sang anything, and it's just the church just pouring their hearts out to God. Now people say, was it scheduled? It was never scheduled. Because if man schedules it, it's not what it needs to be. But God was in it because God wanted it to happen. I'm telling you, our testimony is the greatest thing that we have. Of the what is it that we do whenever we depart out of these doors this evening, when the world sees us, what do they see? I'm thankful as I look in the Old Testament, you can bring the Old Testament, look in the New, and see that God is still faithful. He was faithful to him then, and he is faithful to us now. Do we have any announcements? I'm sure we do. Who's got them? Okay. Okay. Any able-bodied men that can, they're going to set up tables in the fellowship hall for the Mother's Day luncheon. What time Saturday? That's brunch. I know I miss mine every day. I do want to say, well, I'll say this because you probably won't hear it from anybody else. But for the ladies today that provided the lunch for the teachers at Point Pleasant, I've heard nothing but good things. I heard a couple of teachers even talk about how it seems like it's the first time that an outside organization has really done something for the high school teachers for a long time. Because we get forgotten, I guess. But I know I appreciated it. You never know. Something simple as just sending pizza somewhere. You never know what that's going to do to somebody. Because I heard a couple of them ask me, so where's New Hope Church even at? So we got to have that discussion. So just because you assume that a church has been here for a while, that people live here, they know where it's at. Some people don't even know this place is here. So I am thankful for it. It meant a lot. People don't look at that sign. Many of them can't read. Any other announcements? Nothing? All right, we'll stand. I'm going to put him on the spot, but I'm going to ask if Braden will dismiss us in prayer.
Dear Lord, thank